stay. That single word, spoken in a voice like whiskey and smoke, changed everything. It wasn't a question, wasn't quite a command, just an invitation wrapped in the kind of certainty that comes from a man who's never been told no. And there I was, frozen in the doorway of the VIP room I'd stumbled into by mistake, staring at a man who sat shirtless on a black leather couch, his gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch somewhere between my lungs and my throat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a girl from Brooklyn who coordinates corporate events for a living ended up face-to-face with Dominic Kane, the tech billionaire whose face graced Forbes covers, in a private room at the most exclusive club in Manhattan at 2 a.m, with my heart hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. If you want to know how one wrong door led to a love that rewrote every rule I thought I understood, subscribe now. Leave a like if you believe some mistakes are actually destiny in disguise. And tell me in the comments what you would have done in that moment. Would you have stayed? The bass from the club below vibrated through the floor, a rhythmic pulse that matched the pounding in my chest as I stood there, my hand still on the door handle, every instinct screaming at me to apologize and run. The VIP floor of Obsidian was legendary, the kind of place that existed in whispered stories and Instagram posts from people whose lives I could barely imagine. I wasn't supposed to be there. No one like me was supposed to be there. But desperation makes you do things you'd never consider in the light of day. And I'd been desperate. My best friend Chloe had gotten a job waitressing at Obsidian, and she'd begged me to cover her shift because her sister was in the hospital. One shift, she'd said. Just serve drinks, smile, and you'll make enough in tips to cover your rent this month. She'd forgotten to mention that the uniform was practically lingerie, or that the clientele treated servers like furniture, or that the VIP floor was strictly off limits, except to people whose net worth had at least 7 zeros. I'd been looking for the service elevator, trying to carry a tray of champagne glasses without dropping them, when I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere around the 3rd floor. The hallway had been dimly lit, all dark wood and soft amber lighting, and the doors were unmarked. I'd been certain the one at the end would lead to the service stairs. Instead, it had led to him. The room was smaller than I'd expected, intimate rather than ostentatious. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, the city spreading out below like a carpet of lights. The furniture was minimal, expensive, black leather and chrome that probably cost more than my entire apartment. And in the center of it all, on that couch, was Dominic Kane. I knew who he was immediately. You couldn't live in New York and not recognize that face, those sharp cheekbones, that perfectly sculpted jawline that looked like it had been designed to sell cologne or watches or whatever billionaires sold when they weren't busy making more billions. But the magazines didn't capture the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his shoulders carried tension like armor, or the jagged scar that ran from his left collarbone down his chest, disappearing into the waistband of his black suit pants. He'd clearly been in the process of changing, his white dress shirt discarded on the floor beside an overturned glass, the smell of expensive bourbon mixing with his cologne in the air. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray with flecks of silver that caught the light from the city below, and they hadn't left my face since the moment I'd opened the door. "Stay," he'd said, and there was something in his voice that made it impossible to move, something magnetic and dangerous and infinitely compelling. I should have apologized. I should have backed out of the room, closed the door, pretended this never happened. Instead, I found myself stepping inside, letting the door click shut behind me. The sound of it closing felt final, like a decision I couldn't take back. "My name is Maya," I heard myself say, even though he hadn't asked. The tray trembled slightly in my hands, the champagne glasses threatening to slide. I was looking for the service elevator. "This isn't," he interrupted, his voice soft but absolute. the service elevator. His eyes traveled slowly from my face down to the tray in my hands, and something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe, or recognition of the absurdity of the moment. "You work here? Just tonight. I'm covering for a friend." The words came out rushed, defensive. "I don't usually. This isn't my regular job. I coordinate corporate events. I'm good at it, actually. I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Stop talking, Maya," I told myself, but my mouth apparently hadn't gotten the message. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips, the first crack in the mask of exhaustion he wore. "Put the tray down," he said, gesturing to the glass table in front of him. "You look like you're about to drop it." I moved forward on autopilot, my heels sinking into carpet so thick it felt like walking on clouds. As I bent to place the tray on the table, I caught his scent properly for the first time. Sandalwood and cedar, something dark and woodsy with an undertone of smoke. It was the kind of smell that made you want to lean closer, to breathe deeper, and I had to physically stop myself from doing exactly that. When I straightened up, I realized how close we were. If I'd taken one more step, my knees would have touched his. I could see the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, could count the faint freckles scattered across his shoulders, could see the way his hands, large and scarred in ways that didn't match the image of a man who spent his life behind a desk, rested on his thighs with a tension that suggested he was holding himself back from something. "You were supposed to run," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "That's what people usually do when they walk into the wrong room. Smart people, anyway." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Should I? Run?" He leaned back slightly, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're smart, Maya, who coordinates corporate events and doesn't usually work as a waitress, or whether you're curious." The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't sure I understood. Curious about what, I wanted to ask, but the words wouldn't come because I was afraid of what the answer might be. Or maybe I was afraid I already knew. Instead, I found myself sinking onto the opposite end of the couch, my body making decisions my brain hadn't approved, my heart still racing, but for different reasons now. The leather was cool against the back of my thighs, where my too-short uniform skirt had ridden up, and I tugged at it self-consciously, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt under his gaze. He noticed, of course. Men like him noticed everything. But instead of the predatory look I'd learned to recognize from too many nights serving drinks in places like this, there was something else in his eyes. Interest, yes, but also a kind of weariness that seemed to run bone deep. "You don't have to stay," he said, but his tone suggested he hoped I would. I don't know why I said it. I don't know where the courage came from, or the stupidity, because they were probably the same thing. "You told me to stay, so I did." The smile that crossed his face was brief, but genuine, and it transformed him completely. For a moment, the exhaustion lifted, and I caught a glimpse of what he must have looked like before whatever had carved those shadows under his eyes had taken up residence. You always do what strange men tell you. Only the shirtless billionaires I meet by accident at 2 in the morning. It seemed safer than the alternative. And what's the alternative? Going back downstairs where some drunk hedge fund manager is probably going to grab my ass while I'm serving his table and then tip me $5, like he's doing me a favor. The words came out more bitter than I'd intended, sharper, and I saw something shift in his expression. Anger, but not directed at me. Has that happened tonight? 3 times. And counting. He stood up so suddenly I flinched, my body responding to the movement before my mind could process it. But he wasn't moving toward me. He was walking to a phone mounted on the wall near the door, and when he picked it up, his voice was cold, precise, The voice of a man used to being obeyed. Security. This is Kane. VIP 3. I need you to remove Table 7 from the club. Permanently ban them. Yes, all of them. No, I don't care about their membership fees. And send someone to escort Maya. She hesitated, her last name catching on her tongue before she found it. Rodriguez. Escort Maya. Rodriguez, wherever she needs to go for the rest of the night. She's not to be bothered. He hung up without waiting for a response, and when he turned back to me, I was staring at him with my mouth slightly open. You can't just, I started, but he cut me off. I own this club, Maya. I can do whatever I want. And what I want is for you to not spend the rest of your night being treated like an object by men who think money gives them the right to touch women without permission. The casual way he said it, as if having that kind of power was normal, as if using it to defend a stranger was just something people did, left me speechless. I'd spent 26 years learning that the world didn't work that way, that girls like me from neighborhoods like mine had to smile through the indignities and be grateful for the tips. And here was this man, this billionaire in his pristine VIP room, casually rewriting those rules with a phone call. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. He moved back to the couch, but this time he sat closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, despite the air conditioning that kept the room cool. Close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the faint stubble along his jaw, the way his pulse beat in the hollow of his throat. Because, he said, and there was something raw in his voice now, something unguarded. You looked at me like I was a person, not a bank account, not a business opportunity, not a name to drop at parties. Just a person. And I haven't had that in longer than I care to admit. The honesty of it hit me square in the chest. Here was one of the richest men in New York, probably in the country, sitting shirtless in a VIP room at 2 a.m, admitting to loneliness to a waitress who'd stumbled into the wrong door. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was the most human thing I'd heard in months. I'm not exactly living a fairy tale either, I found myself saying, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I have 3 jobs. This, my actual career coordinating events that pay terribly, because everyone thinks it's glamorous, and freelance graphic design on Fiverr at 3 a.m, because New York doesn't care that you have a degree and work 80 hours a week. You're still broke. He finished the sentence for me, and there was understanding in his voice, not pity. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Yesterday. Maybe, I think. Time gets weird when you're always working. He stood again, and this time I tracked his movement as he walked to a phone on the wall, different from the security line. Yes, he said, when someone answered. This is Kane. I need food sent to VIP 3. Everything. No, I don't know what she likes. That's why I said everything. Just send a selection. Good food, not the club menu. Raid the kitchen at Pearl if you have to. 15 minutes. He returned to the couch, this time bringing with him a bottle of water, from a mini fridge I hadn't noticed, handing it to me with a gesture that was almost gentle. Drink? He said. You look like you're about to pass out. I'm fine. Maya. There was something in the way he said my name, firm but not demanding, that made me take the bottle. Our fingers brushed as he handed it to me, and I felt that touch all the way to my toes, a spark of electricity that made my skin tingle. I drank, realizing as the cold water hit my throat how thirsty I actually was. How long had it been since I'd had a break? Since I'd sat down? The shift had started at 6, and it was after 2 now. 8 hours in heels on marble floors, being invisible to people who had more money in their pockets than I made in a year. Why are you really here? I asked when I'd drained half the bottle. in this club you apparently own, alone in a VIP room at 2 in the morning, half-dressed and drinking alone. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the windows, on the city spread out below us like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. Because being alone in a crowd is worse than being alone by yourself, he finally said, his voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear it over the bass, still pounding from below. Because down there, I'm Dominic Kane, the man who made billions before he was 30, who's on every eligible bachelor list, who everyone wants something from. Up here, I'm just, he paused, searching for words, tired. So tired of performing. The vulnerability in those words struck something deep in my chest. I understood that exhaustion in ways I didn't expect to. Not the same circumstances, never the same circumstances, but that bone-deep weariness of always having to be on, always having to perform, always having to smile, when what you really wanted was to scream or cry or just disappear for a while. I get that, I said softly. Different reasons, but I get it. You do? He turned to look at me, really look at me, and I felt seen in a way that was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. How could someone I'd known for barely 15 minutes see me more clearly than people I'd known for years? I work 3 jobs because one should be enough, but isn't. I smile at men who treat me like I'm part of the furniture. I go to family dinners, where everyone asks when I'm going to get a real job, as if coordinating events for Fortune 500 companies isn't real because I'm not wearing a suit in an office. I'm so tired of pretending I have it all together when I'm one broken subway card away from a complete breakdown. The words poured out of me in a rush, things I'd never said out loud to anyone, certainly not to a stranger, definitely not to a billionaire I'd met by stumbling into the wrong room. But something about the darkness, about his own vulnerability, about the surreal nature of this entire encounter, made honesty feel not just possible, but necessary. Tell me about the events you coordinate, he said, and the genuine interest in his voice surprised me. What's the best one you've ever done? There was this tech conference last spring, I said, and despite everything, I felt myself smile at the memory. Small startup, maybe 50 people, but they wanted something special. They couldn't afford the big venues, so I found this old warehouse in Dumbo, right on the water. Transformed it completely. String lights everywhere, these gorgeous vintage furniture pieces I sourced from estate sales, local food trucks instead of catering. It was magical. And you did that with what budget? A fraction of what most people spend. That's the thing everyone doesn't understand. Creativity matters more than money. Well, I paused. Money helps. But you can create something beautiful and meaningful without spending a fortune if you care enough to put in the work. His expression changed as I talked, became more alert, more present. And you love it. Wasn't a question. I do. Even when it doesn't pay enough, even when clients treat me like I'm disposable. I love making moments matter. I love taking someone's vision and making it real. I stopped, suddenly self-conscious. Sorry, I'm rambling. Don't apologize. He shifted closer, his knee almost touching mine now. It's refreshing, hearing someone talk about work with passion instead of just as a means to an end. What about you? I asked, emboldened by his interest. Do you love what you do? I used to. The answer came quickly, as if he'd been waiting for someone to ask. I built my first company when I was 22. Sold it at 25 for more money than I knew what to do with. Built another one, and another. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being about creating something meaningful and became about the numbers, the acquisitions, the board meetings, the shareholders. I became what I built, and I'm not sure I like what that is. Why not stop? He laughed, but it was hollow. And do what? This is all I know. All I've been for so long I don't remember who I was before. The food arrived then, interrupting whatever I might have said in response. A staff member wheeled in a cart loaded with dishes, silver-covered plates that probably cost more than my rent, and the smell that wafted from them made my stomach growl audibly. The staff member, a young man who very carefully didn't make eye contact with either of us, arranged everything on the table and left without a word, the door clicking softly behind him. Dominic stood and began lifting the silver covers, revealing a spread that looked like something from a magazine. Sushi, perfectly arranged, gourmet sliders, a cheese board that could feed 6 people, fresh fruit cut into intricate shapes, pasta in a cream sauce that smelled like heaven. Eat, he said, and this time it was definitely a command, but a gentle one. When's the last time someone took care of you, Maya? The question hit me harder than it should have. I couldn't remember. My parents were back in Puerto Rico, my siblings scattered across, the country chasing their own dreams, my friends, all as broke and overworked as I was. We took care of each other in small ways, covered shifts, split pizza, but actual care? The kind where someone noticed you were struggling and did something about it? I couldn't remember the last time that had happened. I don't need, I started, but he cut me off. I know you don't need it. I'm asking if you want it. For one night, can you let someone take care of you? Just for tonight. The way he phrased it, making it about what I wanted rather than what I needed, making it temporary, contained, somehow made it acceptable. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and watched as he fixed me a plate with portions of everything, his movements careful and deliberate. We ate in comfortable silence, sitting on that expensive leather couch in a VIP room above a nightclub, sharing food that probably cost more than I made in a week. And it was the most intimate thing I'd experienced in years. Not sexual, though there was an undercurrent of attraction thrumming between us like a live wire. But intimate in the way that sharing food is intimate, in the way that comfortable silence is intimate, in the way that being fully present with another human being is intimate. You're not what I expected, I said when I'd eaten enough to feel almost human again. When I saw your face on Forbes, you looked so distant, untouchable. He wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin, a small smile playing at his lips. I am untouchable. That's the problem. When you have this much money, this much power, people don't see you as human anymore. You become an idea, a goal, something to acquire or befriend or use. No one just talks to you. Not really. I'm talking to you. You stumbled into the wrong room by accident? That's different. Is it? I challenged, feeling bold now, fed and warm and caught up in whatever this moment was. Or did I just stumble into the right room at exactly the right time? The question hung in the air between us, and I watched something shift in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or possibility. He set down his plate and turned to face me fully, one arm stretched along the back of the couch, his body angled toward mine in a way that felt deliberate. Tell me something real, he said, his voice low. Something you've never told anyone else. That's a dangerous game, I replied, but I was smiling. Is it? Or is it just honest? I thought about it, about what I could tell this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. This man whose face I'd seen in magazines, but who was sitting here sharing food with me like we were old friends. I'm terrified I'll never be enough, I heard myself say. That no matter how hard I work, how many jobs I take, how much I sacrifice, I'll always be one disaster away from losing everything. That I'll end up like my mother, who worked herself into an early grave, cleaning other people's houses, so her kids could have a better life. And I'll have nothing to show for it except exhaustion and regret. The words felt like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep, somewhere I didn't usually let myself look. Dominic didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to, and took my hand. His palm was warm, calloused in unexpected places, and his thumb traced small circles on the back of my hand that sent shivers up my arm. "Your turn," I said, needing to deflect from the intensity of what I'd just shared. "Tell me something real." "I haven't felt anything in 3 years," he said, and the bluntness of it made me blink. "Not really. Not the way people are supposed to feel things. I go through the motions. I smile at the right times, laugh at jokes, perform interest in conversations. But it's all empty, like I'm watching my life happen from somewhere outside my body. Until tonight." I swallowed hard. "Until tonight?" "Until you walked through that door looking lost and defiant and so completely out of place that it somehow made perfect sense. And when you looked at me, really looked at me, not at what I represent, but at who I am, I felt something. For the first time in 3 years, I felt something. My heart was doing complicated things in my chest, beating too fast and too hard, and I knew I should pull my hand away, should stand up, should thank him for the food, and leave before this became something more than an accidental encounter in a VIP room. But I didn't want to. God help me, I didn't want to. "What happened 3 years ago?" I asked softly. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. His thumb never stopped moving against my hand, that gentle circular motion that was quickly becoming addictive. "My father died," he finally said. "Heart attack. Sudden. One day he was fine, the next he was gone. And standing at his funeral, listening to everyone talk about what a great businessman he was, what a success story, I realized nobody mentioned that he was lonely, that he'd prioritized work over everything else, built this empire, but forgot to build a life. And I looked around at my own life and realized I was exactly the same. I had everything he had: success, money, power, and nothing that actually mattered. "I'm sorry," I said, squeezing his hand, "about your father, and about all of it." "Don't be." He looked at me, and there was something raw in his eyes now. It was a wake-up call. I just haven't figured out yet what to do with the information. "Maybe," I said carefully, "you start by being honest. By letting people see you as human instead of as an idea. By taking the risk that comes with being vulnerable. Like you're doing now. Exactly like I'm doing now. Which is terrifying, by the way." He smiled, and it reached his eyes this time. Good terrified or bad terrified? I don't know yet. I'll tell you when I figure it out. We sat there for a moment, hands still linked, the sounds of the club below reduced to a distant pulse. The city lights through the windows painted everything, in shades of gold and shadow, and I was acutely aware of how close we were, how his eyes kept dropping to my lips before returning to meet my gaze, how the air had gotten heavier, charged with something electric. "I should go," I said, but I didn't move. "You should," he agreed, but his grip on my hand tightened slightly. "But I don't want you to. I don't want to go." "Then stay." There's that word again. He lifted our joined hands, pressing his lips to my knuckles, in a gesture that was somehow more intimate than a kiss. "Stay, Maya, not because I'm telling you to, because you want to. Because whatever this is, I think we both need it." I knew it was reckless. I knew that girls like me didn't get fairy tale endings with billionaires in VIP rooms. I knew that tomorrow morning, this would probably feel like a dream, or a mistake, or both. But I also knew that he was right. Whatever this was, this connection that had sparked between two people who should never have met, I needed it. Needed to feel seen. Needed to feel like I mattered. Needed to feel something other than tired and scared and alone. "Okay," I whispered. I'll stay. The smile that broke across his face was like watching the sun rise, and before I could process what was happening, he was standing, pulling me gently to my feet. The movement brought us close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his bare chest, close enough to count the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said, his voice rough. "If you don't want that, tell me to stop." I didn't tell him to stop. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing along my cheekbone with a gentleness that made my breath catch. He gave me time to pull away, time to change my mind, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. And then he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or desperate, though I could feel the restraint in the tension of his body. It was slow, thorough, like he was trying to memorize the taste of me, the feel of me. His lips were softer than I expected, warm and insistent, but not demanding. When his tongue traced the seam of my lips, I opened for him without thinking, and the sound he made low in his throat sent heat pooling in my belly. My hands found his chest, palms flat against warm skin, and I could feel his heart hammering as fast as mine. The scar I'd noticed earlier was rough under my fingertips, and I traced it without thinking, feeling him shiver at the touch. He pulled me closer, one arm wrapping around my waist, the other hand threading through my hair, and I forgot how to breathe properly. Forgot everything except the taste of him, the feel of him, the way this kiss was rewriting something fundamental in my understanding of what connection could feel like. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "That was," I started, but couldn't find words. "Yeah," he agreed, his thumb stroking the side of my neck where my pulse was racing. "Yeah." We stood there for a long moment, just breathing, just being, and it felt more significant than any kiss I'd ever experienced, like we'd crossed some invisible line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I should tell you something," I said, my voice shaky. "Before this goes any further, you should know." He pulled back slightly to look at me, his expression open, attentive. "I'm not. I've never." The words stuck in my throat, embarrassment flooding through me. "I'm 26 and I've never been with anyone. Not like this. Not all the way." I watched his expression carefully, waiting for disappointment or disbelief or worse, pity. Instead, his eyes darkened with something that looked like reverence. "Oh, Maya," he breathed, his hand tightening in my hair. You're telling me this because? Because I don't want you to expect something I can't give. Because I don't want you to think I do this, stumble into VIP rooms and kiss strangers. Because I want you to understand that I'm completely out of my depth here, but I don't want to stop." He kissed me again, softer this time, gentler. When he pulled back, his eyes were serious. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We can just talk. Just be here together. This doesn't have to be anything more than what you want it to be." "But I started, then stopped, trying to find the courage to be as honest as he'd been. "I want to know what it feels like, to be wanted by someone who sees me, to feel something real instead of just going through the motions. I want to stop being afraid of living." "Then let me show you," he said, and there was a promise in his voice. "Let me show you what it feels like to be seen, to be valued, to be cherished. No pressure, no expectations. Just us. Here. Now." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He took my hand and led me to the couch, but instead of what I expected, he simply sat down and pulled me to sit beside him, angled so I was facing him. "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me about your life. Your real life, not the version you perform for other people." So I did. I told him about growing up in Brooklyn, about my mother who died when I was 20, about the guilt I carried for being the only one of her kids who stayed in New York instead of moving away for better opportunities. I told him about the tiny studio apartment in Washington Heights that I loved despite the broken radiator and the neighbors who fought at 3 in the morning. I told him about my dream of starting my own event planning company, about the business plan I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, but never had the courage or capital to execute. And he listened, really listened, not checking his phone or looking distracted, but fully present in a way that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. When I finally ran out of words, he told me about his life, about growing up with every material advantage, but no emotional connection, about a mother who'd left when he was young and a father who'd viewed him as a successor rather than a son, about building his first company at 22, not because he loved technology, but because it was the only language his father spoke, about the isolation that came with success, the way every relationship felt transactional, the exhaustion of never knowing if people wanted him or what he represented. We talked for hours, or maybe minutes, time losing all meaning in that room above the city. At some point, he'd put his shirt back on, and I'd kicked off my heels, and we'd shifted, so I was leaning against him, his arm around my shoulders, my head on his chest, where I could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "This is crazy," I murmured at one point. "I don't even know you." "You know me better than most people who've been in my life for years," he replied, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "You know what I'm afraid of, what I regret, what I want. That's more than knowing someone's favorite color or their coffee order." The club had gone quiet below, the party winding down as dawn approached. Through the windows, the sky was beginning to lighten, the deep black fading to navy, then to that particular shade of gray-blue that precedes sunrise. "I should really go," I said, but I didn't move. The real world is going to return with daylight. This, whatever this is, it can't exist outside this room. Why not? He shifted so he could look at me. "Why can't this exist in daylight?" "Because you're Dominic Kane, and I'm a girl who stumbled into the wrong room. Because this doesn't happen in real life. Because fairy tales end when the clock strikes midnight, or in this case, when the sun comes up." He was quiet for a moment, then stood, pulling me with him. "Come with me." "Where?" "Trust me." He led me to the windows, and we stood there as the sun began to rise over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and orange. The city that never slept was taking a breath, that brief moment between night and morning when anything felt possible. "See that?" He pointed at the skyline. "That's the building where I signed my first major deal. Lost sleep for weeks worrying I'd made a mistake. And that one? That's where I had my first panic attack. Thought I was having a heart attack. Ended up in the ER feeling like an idiot. And that small building that doesn't look like much. That's where I bought my first cup of coffee in New York. $3, and I thought it was highway robbery." He turned to look at me. "This city is full of my stories, Maya, and now you're part of them. This room, this night, this sunrise, it's all real. You're real. What we felt tonight is real, and I don't want it to end just because the sun came up." "But it has to," I said, even as my heart screamed at me to stop talking, to accept what he was offering. "You live in a world I can't even imagine. Tomorrow you'll go back to your life, and I'll go back to mine, and this will just be a beautiful memory." "Or," he said, turning to face me fully, taking both my hands in his, "it could be the beginning. Give me your phone." "What?" "Your phone. Give it to me." Confused, I pulled my phone from where I'd stuck it in my bra, the only place to keep it in this ridiculous uniform. He took it, fingers flying over the screen, then handed it back. I looked down to see a new contact. "Dominic, just his first name, and a phone number. "That's my personal cell," he said. "Not my assistant's number, not my office line. Me. Directly. I want to see you again, Maya. Tomorrow, if you'll let me. Today, technically, since it's already past 5 in the morning." "I can't," I started, but he pressed a finger gently to my lips. "Yes, you can. I know you're scared. I'm terrified. This isn't how my life works. I don't do spontaneous. I don't do impulsive. And I definitely don't do whatever this is. But I want to. With you, I want to try." I stared at him, at this impossible man with his gray eyes and his scars and his honesty, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Something that had been locked away for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Hope. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." His smile was brilliant. "You'll see me again. One date, a real one, where we both know what we're walking into. If it's terrible, if the magic doesn't work in daylight, we can walk away. But we have to try. One date," I agreed. And then, because I was apparently incapable of not pushing, "Where does someone like you take someone like me on a date?" "Someone like you," he repeated, shaking his head. "Maya, you coordinated a tech conference in a Dumbo warehouse on a shoestring budget and made it magical. You work 3 jobs to chase your dreams. You're honest enough to tell a stranger your fears. You're brave enough to stay when you could have run. You're not someone like you. You're extraordinary. And where do I take someone extraordinary? Somewhere unexpected. I'll pick you up at 7. His fingers were typing into his own phone now. "What's your address?" I gave it to him, watching his eyebrows rise slightly. "It's not much," I said defensively. "It's perfect," he corrected. "It's real. Now come on, let me walk you out." The club was empty now, chairs upturned on tables, cleaning crew working quietly. In the harsh fluorescent lights of closing time, everything looked different, less glamorous, more real. I was acutely aware of my waitress uniform, my messy hair, the fact that I probably had mascara smudged under my eyes. But Dominic walked beside me with his hand on the small of my back, protective, as if escorting me through his empty club was the most natural thing in the world. At the door, he handed me a card. "For the cab," he said. "And Maya? Don't overthink this. Just see where it goes." I took the card, noting it was a black American Express, the kind I'd only seen in movies. I don't even know how to use this. "Tell the driver to charge whatever the fare is. Keep it until I see you again." That's insane. "You don't just hand out credit cards. I do when I want to make sure you get home safely and don't have to take 3 trains in the dark. Humor me." I slipped the card into my phone case, shaking my head. "You're ridiculous. I'm determined. There's a difference." He leaned down and kissed me one more time, soft and sweet and full of promise. "See you at 7, Maya Rodriguez. See you at 7, Dominic Kane." I climbed into the cab he'd called, and as it pulled away from the curb, I looked back to see him standing in the doorway, watching until I was out of sight. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. I made it home as the sun was fully up, climbing the 4 flights of stairs to my studio because the elevator was broken again. Inside, my apartment looked exactly as I'd left it, tiny and cluttered and filled with the evidence of a life lived in controlled chaos. Event planning folders stacked on every surface, my laptop open on the kitchen counter that doubled as my desk, dirty dishes in the sink because I'd been too rushed to wash them. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. My hair was a mess, my makeup smudged, but there was something different in my eyes, a light that hadn't been there before. I pulled out my phone, looking at his contact, half convinced I'd imagined the entire night. But no, there it was. Dominic. and beneath it, a text that must have come through while I was in the cab. Thank you for staying. Sleep well, Maya. I didn't know what to respond, so I just sent back a simple, thank you for asking me to. I fell into bed, still in my uniform, too exhausted to change, and dreamed of gray eyes and sunrise and the feeling of being truly seen for the first time in my life. When I woke, it was past noon, and I had 7 missed calls from Chloe and a text that said simply, "You're alive? Call me immediately. I'm at the hospital for another 3 hours, but I need details." I called, and she answered on the first ring. "Please tell me you survived the night and made enough in tips to justify me throwing you into that hellhole." I made something better than tips, I said, and then I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Maya," she finally said, her voice careful. "You know this can't be real, right? Guys like Dominic Kane don't fall for waitresses they meet by accident." "I know," I said, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. "But what if they do? Then you're living in a romance novel, and I want my own billionaire," she laughed. "But seriously, be careful. Guard your heart. These kinds of men, they're used to getting what they want, and when they do, they move on." "I know," I repeated, but her warning sat heavy in my chest. Because she was right, wasn't she? This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to girls like me. But when 7 o'clock approached, and my phone buzzed with a text, saying he was downstairs, my heart leapt in a way that made all the logical warnings disappear. I'd agonized over what to wear, trying on everything in my limited closet 3 times before settling on a simple black dress. Not too formal, not too casual, and most importantly, actually mine, and not borrowed. I'd left my hair down, applied minimal makeup, and now as I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked hopeful. Terrified, but hopeful. He was waiting outside in a car that was surprisingly understated. Still expensive, I could tell that from the sleek lines and the way it seemed to purr rather than rumble, but not ostentatious. When I slid into the passenger seat, he turned to look at me, and the expression on his face made every minute of agonizing over my outfit worthwhile. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up pretty well yourself," I replied, taking in his dark jeans and white button-down, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows in a way that should be illegal. "No suit? I'm off duty tonight. Tonight is just Dominic, not Dominic Kane, CEO. Can you tell the difference?" "Not yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out." He smiled and pulled into traffic, heading downtown. I tried not to think about the fact that this car probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years, or that the watch on his wrist could pay off my student loans. Instead, I focused on the way he drove with one hand, the other resting on the console between us, close enough to touch if I was brave enough. "Where are we going?" I asked when we'd been driving for 10 minutes. "Somewhere I haven't been in 15 years, he said. "Somewhere that used to matter to me before I forgot what mattering meant." "That's cryptic." "Trust me," he said, glancing over with a smile. "I'm learning to," I admitted, and watched something soften in his expression. We ended up in Chinatown, parking on a side street that didn't look like anywhere a billionaire would voluntarily go. The buildings were old, paint peeling, signs in Chinese and English advertising services and shops that had been there for generations. He took my hand as we walked, our fingers intertwining naturally, and led me to a small restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a shop selling herbs I couldn't identify. The sign above the door was faded, the name barely legible. "This," he said, stopping in front of it, "is where I had my first meal in New York. I was 18, fresh off the bus from California, with $200 in my pocket, and no idea what I was doing. I wandered around for hours, too proud to admit I was lost, too stubborn to ask for help. And I ended up here, starving and desperate. And the owner, Mrs. Chen, she took one look at me and sat me down and fed me. I tried to explain the concept of poverty to her in broken English, and she just laughed and said no one goes hungry in her restaurant. He pulled open the door, and we stepped into a space that was nothing like the restaurants in, the club. It was tiny, maybe 8 tables, with faded linens and mismatched chairs. The walls were covered in photos, decades of memories and customers, and the smell coming from the kitchen made my mouth water instantly. And there, behind the counter, was a small Chinese woman who must have been in her 70s, her face lighting up when she saw Dominic. "Nicky," she hurried around the counter with surprising speed, reaching up to cup his face in both hands. "Too thin." "You don't eat." "I eat, Mrs. Chen," he said, and I could hear the affection in his voice, just not as well as when you feed me. She turned to look at me, her sharp eyes taking in everything from my dress to my shoes to the way Dominic's hand held mine. "And who is this?" "This is Maya." "Maya, this is Mrs. Chen, who probably saved my life 15 years ago." "Saved your life by feeding you," she scoffed, but she was smiling. Always so dramatic, this boy. "Come, come, I make you special dinner." She led us to a corner table, rattling off something in rapid Chinese to someone in the kitchen, then disappeared, leaving us alone. I looked around the restaurant, seeing it with new eyes now. "This was before," I said. "Before you became Dominic Kane. Before I forgot who Nicky from California was, he agreed. I used to come here every week when I was starting my first company. Mrs. Chen never cared about my business plans or my projections. She just wanted to make sure I ate vegetables and didn't work too hard." "Why did you stop coming?" "Success," he said simply. "I started eating at places where people expected to see Dominic Kane, places where the wine list was longer than the menu, and every table was a networking opportunity. I forgot about places like this, places where people care about you, not what you can do for them." The food started arriving then, dish after dish of home-style Chinese cooking that bore no resemblance to the takeout I was used to. Mrs. Chen explained each one, sometimes in English, sometimes in Chinese, with Dominic translating, her hands gesturing as she described how her mother made this dish, how her grandmother taught her that technique. "Eat! Eat!" she commanded, piling food onto our plates. "You both too thin. You work too hard. You need good food, good rest, good love." She winked at us before disappearing back into the kitchen, and I felt my face heat. "She's subtle," I said, and Dominic laughed, as a brick through a window. "But she means well." We ate, and it was some of the best food I'd ever tasted. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just honest, well-made food prepared with care. And as we ate, we talked. Really talked, the way we had in the VIP room, but somehow easier now, more natural. I told him about my worst event planning disaster, when a bride had fired me 2 hours before her wedding, and I'd spent the whole night crying in my car. He told me about his biggest business failure, a company he'd poured 3 years and millions of dollars into that had collapsed in spectacular fashion. We laughed about awkward first kisses and terrible fashion choices in high school. We debated whether New York pizza was actually better than anywhere else, or if we just told ourselves that. And underneath it all, there was this growing sense of rightness, of pieces fitting together that I hadn't known were misaligned. After dinner, he paid Mrs. Chen, who refused at first, insisting he was family, and family didn't pay. But he pressed money into her hand anyway, probably more than the meal cost, and she kissed both his cheeks and told him to bring me back soon. "You take care of him," she told me seriously. "He forgets to take care of himself. He needs someone to remind him." "I'll try," I promised, and her smile told me she approved. Outside, the night had settled fully, the street lamps casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. Dominic turned to me, his hands in his pockets, looking almost nervous. "I want to show you something else," he said. "But it requires trust. I already trusted you enough to get in your car and eat at a mystery restaurant. How much more trust are we talking about?" He held out his hand. "Come with me, and you'll see." I took his hand, and we walked. Through Chinatown's bustling streets, past Canal Street's counterfeit handbag vendors, through the transition into Little Italy, and then into Soho. I was getting tired in my heels, and he must have noticed because he stopped suddenly. "Wait here," he said, and ducked into a shop that was still open. He emerged a minute later with a bag, and inside was a pair of simple sneakers. "Let me," he said, and before I could protest, he was kneeling on the sidewalk, helping me out of my heels and into the sneakers. They fit perfectly, and when I asked how he knew my size, he just smiled and said he noticed things. We walked for another 20 minutes, and then we were there. I looked up at the building and felt my breath catch. "This is," I started. "My first office," he finished. Well, not an office, really. More like a corner of a warehouse I rented for $300 a month. The building was different now, renovated, probably filled with expensive lofts and hip startups. But he led me around to the fire escape in the back, and we climbed up, until we were on the roof. The view was spectacular. Manhattan spread out before us, the skyline glittering like someone had spilled stars across the horizon. "I used to come up here when things got hard," he said, sitting on the edge with his legs dangling over. "When I thought I was going to fail, when I was terrified I'd made a huge mistake leaving California, when I couldn't figure out how to make payroll. I'd sit up here and remind myself why I started." "What was the why?" I asked, sitting beside him carefully. "To prove I could do it on my own, to build something that mattered, to show my father that there was more to success than quarterly earnings reports." "And did you? Did I what? Prove it? Show him?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I proved it. The first time Forbes called me for an interview, I called him immediately. Wanted him to be proud, to acknowledge that I'd done something significant. You know what he said?" "What?" He said, "Call me back when you've made your second billion. Anyone can get lucky once." The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. I took his hand, threading our fingers together. "I'm sorry. He didn't deserve you." "Maybe," Dominic said. "Or maybe I didn't deserve him. Maybe if I'd tried harder, been better, he would have." "Don't do that," I said firmly. "Don't make his inability to love properly your fault. You achieved something incredible. You built something from nothing. The fact that he couldn't see it, couldn't celebrate it, that's his failure, not yours." He turned to look at me, and there was wonder in his eyes. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See through all the bullshit to what matters." "It's a gift," I said lightly, but he didn't smile. "I'm serious, Maya. In one night and one day, you've seen me more clearly than people I've known for years. You cut through all the defenses and the performance, and you just see me. It's terrifying and amazing, and I don't know what to do with it." "You could just let yourself be seen," I suggested. "You could stop performing and just be Dominic, even if that Dominic is scared and lonely and doesn't have all the answers. Even if that Dominic is just a guy from California who's trying to figure out what matters." "Especially that Dominic," I said softly. "He deserves to be seen too." He kissed me then, there on the roof under the stars, with Manhattan spread out below us. And it was different from the kiss in the VIP room. That one had been discovery, the shock of connection. This one was confirmation. This is real. You're real. We're real. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "I want to keep seeing you," he said. Not just another date. I don't know what I want exactly, but I know it involves you. In my life, however that looks. I want that too, I admitted. But I'm scared. Of what? Of this being a fantasy that can't survive reality. Of you waking up one day and realizing I'm just a girl from Brooklyn who can't afford her rent half the time. Of this ending, and it hurting more, because I let myself believe it was real. Then we'll be scared together, he said, and we'll figure it out as we go. No expectations, no timeline, just us, trying to navigate whatever this is. Can you do that? I thought about Chloe's warnings, about every logical reason this was a bad idea, about the very real possibility of getting my heart broken. And then I looked at him, at this man who was letting me see past his walls, who'd brought me to a rooftop that mattered to him, who'd knelt on a sidewalk to buy me sneakers so my feet wouldn't hurt. Yes, I said, I can do that. We sat on that rooftop for hours, talking and kissing, and just being together. He told me about his dreams for a foundation that would fund small businesses in underserved communities, something he'd been planning in secret for months. I told him about my business plan, the one I'd never had the courage to execute, and he listened with the focus of someone who understood what it meant to risk everything on a dream. When the night grew cold, he gave me his jacket, and when I protested that he'd freeze, he pulled me against him, wrapping us both in the warmth of shared body heat. Around midnight, he got a call that made him tense, his jaw tightening as he listened. When he hung up, he looked at me apologetically. I have to take care of something. Business that can't wait. I'm sorry. It's okay, I said, trying not to feel disappointed. I should get home anyway. I have an event in the morning. Let me take you home. We climbed down the fire escape, and the drive back to my apartment was quiet but comfortable, his hand finding mine across the console. When we pulled up in front of my building, he turned off the engine and turned to face me. This was the best date I've ever been on, he said, and I've been on a lot of terrible dates, so that's saying something. I laughed. High praise. When can I see you again? Tomorrow. He looked regretful. I'm in meetings all day tomorrow, and then I fly to San Francisco for a conference. I'll be gone for 3 days. 3 days felt like forever, which was ridiculous, considering I'd known him for barely 36 hours. But the thought of not seeing him, not talking to him, left a hollow feeling in my chest. But I can call you? He asked, almost hesitant. Every night if you want. I might want, he said, leaning in to kiss me goodnight. It was supposed to be a brief kiss, a simple goodbye, but it deepened, became more urgent, his hand tangling in my hair as I gripped his shirt. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. I should go, I said, but I didn't move. You should, he agreed, but he kissed me again, and again. We were like teenagers, unable to stop touching, unable to say goodbye. Finally, I forced myself to open the car door. 3 days, I said. 3 days, he confirmed. And then, Maya? Yeah? That night in the VIP room? When you walked in? I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Still do. I felt my face heat and I smiled. Sweet talker. Truth teller. There's a difference. I climbed out of the car and walked to my building, turning at the door to wave. He waited until I was inside before driving away, and I climbed the stairs to my apartment feeling like I was floating. The 3 days he was gone were strange. We talked every night, long conversations that stretched past midnight. He'd call from his hotel room, and I'd curl up on my bed, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. He told me about the conference, about the deals being made, about his boredom with corporate networking that used to thrill him. I told him about events I was coordinating, about difficult clients, about my dreams of expansion. And every night, before we hung up, he'd say something that made my heart skip. I miss you. Sleep well. Can't wait to see you. When he got back, we fell into a pattern. He'd pick me up after work, and we'd explore the city together. Not the fancy restaurants or exclusive clubs, but the New York that mattered to both of us. We had pizza in Brooklyn and argued about which neighborhood had the best slice. We rode the subway just to people watch and make up stories about strangers. We found a bookstore in the village and spent hours browsing, him buying me books I mentioned liking, me refusing until he threatened to buy the entire shelf. We went to Coney Island and rode the rickety old rides, laughing like children. We found street musicians in Washington Square Park and danced badly to their music. We stayed up all night at a diner in Queens, drinking terrible coffee and talking about philosophy and what it meant to live a meaningful life. And slowly, carefully, we started sharing the more vulnerable parts of ourselves. He told me about panic attacks that came from nowhere, about the pressure of being responsible for thousands of employees, about loneliness so profound, it felt like drowning. I told him about the guilt of leaving my family in Puerto Rico, about imposter syndrome that made me question every success, about the fear that I was wasting my life chasing impossible dreams. We saw each other almost every day for a month, and somewhere in that time, without either of us saying it explicitly, we stopped being two people casually dating and became something more. Something that felt permanent, even though neither of us wanted to examine it too closely for fear of jinxing it. It was 5 weeks in when everything shifted. We were at his penthouse, a place he'd been hesitant to bring me because he said it felt sterile, like a hotel room rather than a home. But I'd been curious, and he'd finally agreed. He was right. It was beautiful in the way that magazine spreads are beautiful, perfectly designed and completely impersonal. There was nothing in it that told you anything about the person who lived there. "You don't have any photos," I said, wandering through rooms that could have belonged to anyone. "No personal touches. Nothing that shows this is your home." "I don't have photos to display," he said from where he stood in the kitchen, opening a bottle of wine. "Don't have personal touches. This is just where I sleep between meetings." This made me sad in ways I couldn't articulate. Everyone deserves a home, not just a place to sleep. "Then help me make it one," he said, handing me a glass of wine. His eyes were serious, vulnerable. I don't know how. I've never known how. We spent that evening talking about what home meant, about memories and comfort and belonging. And at some point, the conversation shifted, became charged with something electric. He set down his wine glass and turned to face me, his expression intense. "Maya," he said, and there was something in his voice that made my pulse quicken. "I need to tell you something." "Okay," I said, my heart starting to race. "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between us, terrifying and wonderful. And I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for 5 weeks. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. You've changed everything. The way I see the world, the way I see myself, what I want from life. And I need you to know that before we go any further. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the overwhelming rush of emotion his words created. "I love you too," I whispered, and watched his expression transform. "Really? Really? I'm terrified, and this is insane, and I don't know how to navigate this, but yes, I love you." He crossed the distance between us in 2 steps, pulling me into a kiss that was different from all the ones before. This one was a promise, a claim, a beginning. When he pulled back, his hands framing my face, his eyes were dark with desire. "Stay tonight," he said. "Stay with me." "You know I've never," I started, but he cut me off with another kiss. "I know. And we'll only go as far as you want to go. No pressure. I want to hold you. I want to fall asleep with you. I want to wake up and know you're here. We can just sleep if that's what you want. But I didn't want to just sleep. I wanted him. Wanted to know what it felt like to be loved by him, to be touched by someone who saw me, truly saw me, and loved me anyway. "Okay," I said, my voice shaky. "Okay." He took my hand and led me to his bedroom, and it was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, all neutral tones and expensive furniture. But when he turned on the lights, they were soft, warm, and suddenly it felt intimate rather than sterile. We stood facing each other, and I could see he was nervous too, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for me. "Can I?" he started, his fingers touching the strap of my dress, and I nodded, unable to speak. He undressed me slowly, reverently, as if I was something precious. Each piece of clothing that fell away was accompanied by kisses, by whispered words of how beautiful I was, how perfect, how lucky he felt. When I was standing before him in just my underwear, I felt more exposed than I ever had in my life. Not just physically, but emotionally. He could see all of me now, could see the body I'd always been self-conscious about, could see my vulnerability written in every line. "You're shaking," he said softly, his hands running up and down my arms. "Are you cold?" "Scared," I admitted. "What if I don't know what to do? What if I'm not good at this? What if I disappoint you?" "Maya," he said, tilting my chin up so I had to meet his eyes. "You could never disappoint me. This isn't about performance or expectations. This is about us, about showing each other what we feel. There's no right or wrong way to do this." He kissed me then, slow and deep, and his hands were gentle as they explored my body, learning what made me gasp, what made me press closer. When he lifted me and carried me to the bed, I felt cherished rather than objectified. He undressed himself, and I watched with fascination, taking in the scars I'd only glimpsed before, the evidence of a life lived outside boardrooms. The prominent one that ran down his chest, I traced it with my fingers. "What happened?" "Car accident when I was 23, he said. "Fell asleep at the wheel after working a 48-hour stretch. Nearly died. That's when I learned you can't outrun your problems by working yourself to death." He settled beside me on the bed, his body warm against mine, and for a long moment, we just lay there, looking at each other. "I'm going to make this good for you," he promised. "I'm going to take my time, and we'll stop whenever you want. Just tell me if anything doesn't feel right." What followed was nothing like I'd imagined. There was no awkwardness, no pain that wasn't quickly soothed by his patience. He touched me as if learning a language, paying attention to every response, every sound I made. He whispered questions. "Is this okay? Does this feel good? Do you want more?" And I answered with gasps and moans, and eventually words. "Yes, please, don't stop." When he finally moved over me, his eyes locked on mine. He whispered, "I love you." And then he was inside me. And the world narrowed to just us. Just this moment. Just the feeling of being completely connected to another human being. It wasn't the 7 times of that story from the VIP room title. It was once, perfect and profound. And when it was over, we lay tangled together, our hearts gradually slowing, our breathing returning to normal. That was, I started, but couldn't find words adequate to describe what I'd just experienced. "Perfect," he finished, kissing my forehead. "You're perfect." We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when I woke in the middle of the night, I found him watching me in the darkness. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," he said. "That you trusted me with this. That I don't deserve you, but I'm going to spend every day trying to." "You already deserve me," I said. "You deserve to be loved, Dominic. To be seen and valued for who you are, not what you've built." He pulled me closer, and I felt wetness on my shoulder. He was crying, silent tears that spoke to something breaking open inside him. I held him, stroking his hair, letting him release whatever he'd been holding in for years. In the morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. Dominic was sitting on the edge of the bed, already dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, 2 mugs in his hands. "Good morning," he said, and his smile was different. Lighter. Genuine in a way I hadn't seen before. "Morning," I replied, sitting up and accepting the coffee. "You look happy." "I am happy. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I'm actually happy. And it's because of you." We spent that day in his penthouse, and true to my word from weeks before, I helped him make it a home. We went shopping, not at expensive design stores, but at flea markets and vintage shops. We found artwork that spoke to him, photos he'd forgotten he had that we framed and hung. We rearranged furniture so the space felt less like a showroom and more like a place where people actually lived. By the time we were done, exhausted and covered in dust, his penthouse felt different. Lived in. Loved. "This is what a home should feel like," he said, looking around with satisfaction. "And you did this. We did this," I corrected. "Together." "Together," he repeated and pulled me in for a kiss. Over the next few weeks, we navigated what it meant to be in a real relationship. He met my friends, charming Chloe despite her initial skepticism, and winning over my other friends, with his genuine interest in their lives. I met his business partners, navigating the curious looks and barely concealed speculation with as much grace as I could manage. There were challenges, photographers who caught us leaving restaurants, and suddenly my face was in tabloids, with headlines speculating about the billionaire's new girlfriend. Invitations to events in his world that required dresses I couldn't afford, until he gently suggested we go shopping together, framing it as him wanting to spoil me rather than charity. Moments when the differences in our worlds felt insurmountable, when I felt out of place and inadequate. But there were also beautiful moments, him showing up at my events to help set up, rolling up his sleeves and moving furniture like any other worker, taking me to meet Mrs. Chen, who declared us perfect for each other and started planning our wedding before we'd even discussed it. Quiet nights in either his penthouse or my tiny studio, proving that love didn't care about square footage or thread count. It was 3 months in when he made his proposition. We were having dinner at a nice restaurant, celebrating a major event I'd successfully coordinated, when he got serious. "I've been thinking," he said, setting down his fork, "about your business plan, the one you've never had the capital to execute." "I don't want to talk about work tonight," I said. "This is supposed to be a celebration. This is a celebration. Maya, I want to invest in you, not in some company, not in an abstract business plan. In you, specifically. I want to fund your event planning company. Full capital, no strings attached." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What? You're brilliant at what you do. You shouldn't be working 3 jobs and struggling to make rent. You should be building your empire, your way. So let me help you do that." "No," I said immediately. "Absolutely not." "Maya." "No, I appreciate the thought, but I can't take your money." "Why not?" "Because it would change everything. Because then I'd always wonder if you thought I was with you for your money, or if other people thought that. Because I need to do this, myself, to know I earned it." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I understand." "But Maya, there's a difference between accepting help and being bought. I'm not offering this because I think you need to be saved or because I'm trying to control you. I'm offering because you have a dream, and I have the means to help make it reality. And people who love each other help each other achieve their dreams. That's what partners do." "Partners," I repeated. Is that what we are? I want us to be, he said. I know it's fast. I know people will think we're crazy, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Maya Rodriguez. I want to build a life with you. Not my life with you in it, or your life with me in it, but our life, together. I felt tears welling up, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was saying. I want that too, I whispered. But I need to do this business thing myself, or at least mostly myself. Can we compromise? What kind of compromise? I'll accept investment capital, but as a loan. Standard interest rates, payment terms, the whole thing. Strictly business. That way it's not charity, it's an investment in a business you believe in. And I'll prove to you, and everyone else, that I'm worth believing in. He smiled, that brilliant smile that made my heart skip. You already have proven that. But if this is what you need to feel comfortable, then yes. We'll do it as a business loan. Do you have a lawyer who can draw up the papers? I'll have my lawyers draft something, but you should have your own lawyer review it. I don't have money for a lawyer. Then we'll find one who'll work pro bono or on contingency. This is going to be done right, Maya. You're going to have everything you need to succeed. 6 months after I stumbled into that VIP room by mistake, my life looked completely different. My event planning company, Moments by Maya, had officially launched with 3 major clients already signed, and a waiting list that was growing daily. I'd hired 2 assistants and was looking at office space, real office space, not just working from my apartment. Dominic had kept his promise, treating the investment as strictly business, with proper loan documents and repayment terms that I was already meeting ahead of schedule. But more than the business success, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. I'd moved out of my studio, not into Dominic's penthouse, but into a beautiful 1-bedroom in Brooklyn that was all mine, that I could afford with my company's profits. Dominic split his time between his place and mine, and we'd established a rhythm that worked for both of us. We still explored the city together, still had long conversations that stretched into the early morning hours, still found joy in simple things, like Sunday morning bagels and lazy afternoons in Prospect Park. But we'd also built something deeper, something that had survived the initial intensity and settled into real, lasting love. He'd started his foundation, using his wealth to fund small businesses in underserved communities, and watching him talk about the entrepreneurs he was helping, seeing him find purpose beyond profit margins, was beautiful. I'd helped him choose which applications to fund, using my experience with tight budgets and creative solutions to identify people who had passion, but not capital. We'd become partners in the truest sense, supporting each other's dreams while maintaining our own identities. And then, one evening, 6 months and 3 weeks after that first night, he took me back to that rooftop where we'd had our second date. We climbed the fire escape in the dark, and when we reached the top, the roof was transformed. String lights everywhere, creating a canopy of stars. A blanket spread out with a picnic basket. The Manhattan skyline as our backdrop. "What is all this?" I asked, turning to look at him. He was nervous. I could see it in the way he shifted his weight, in the slight tremor in his hands. "This is me," he said, taking my hands in his, asking you the most important question I'll ever ask. Maya Rodriguez, you stumbled into my life by accident, but keeping you has been the most deliberate choice I've ever made. You've shown me what it means to really live, to be seen, to be loved for who I am rather than what I have. You've made me a better man, a happier man, a man who understands that real wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with genuine human connection." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a small box, and my heart stopped. "I don't want to live another day without knowing you'll be by my side forever. Will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful, simple, and elegant. Nothing ostentatious but perfect in its craftsmanship. But it wasn't the ring that made me cry. It was the look in his eyes, the vulnerability, the hope, the love that was so evident it took my breath away. "Yes," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto my finger with shaking hands, and then he was standing, lifting me into his arms, spinning me around as we both laughed and cried. When he set me down, he kissed me with all the passion and promise of forever. "We're going to have an incredible life together," he said, when we finally pulled apart. "It might not always be easy. There'll be challenges, conflicts, moments when we have to work to remember why we chose this. But I promise you, Maya, I will choose you every single day. I will see you, value you, love you with everything I have." "You already do," I said, touching his face, tracing the lines I'd memorized over the past months. "And I promise the same. To see you, to remind you of who you are when you forget. To build a life with you that's measured in moments and memories rather than dollars and deals." We stayed on that rooftop for hours, making plans and dreaming about the future. A small wedding, we decided. Just the people who really mattered. Mrs. Chen would do the catering, because of course she would. We'd honeymoon somewhere quiet, away from cameras and crowds, just us. We'd build our life together, supporting each other's dreams while creating new dreams together. As the night grew late and the city lights blurred together below us, I thought about that moment 6 months ago when I'd opened the wrong door. How terrified I'd been. How certain I was that I didn't belong in that world. How wrong I'd been. I didn't stumble into the wrong room that night. I stumbled into exactly the right one, at exactly the right time, to meet exactly the right person. Sometimes the best things in life come from mistakes. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with wrong turns. Sometimes all you need is the courage to stay when every instinct tells you to run. And sometimes, when a shirtless billionaire looks at you and says, "Stay," the smartest thing you can do is listen. Because real love, the kind that transforms lives and rewrites futures, the kind that proves fairy tales can exist in the real world, doesn't follow rules or timelines or logic. It just happens, unexpected and perfect, when two people are brave enough to be vulnerable, honest enough to be real, and open enough to let love in. This is our story. The story of how a wrong door led to the rightest thing I've ever done. The story of how being seen can heal even the deepest wounds. The story of how love, real love, is worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in love that transforms, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Share your own story in the comments. Tell me about the moment when everything changed for you. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful destinations are the ones we never planned to reach. Sometimes, getting lost is exactly how we find what we were looking for all along.